and I intend to take next hour or so taking you through an overview with one or two practical exercises and explanations along the way on leading with emotional intelligence in challenging times. And I obviously don't need to tell you that right at this moment in time, it is challenging in ways that really none of us expected this time last year. And so we want to go through it. We want to go through it a little bit, but before I do, this is a webinar, so unfortunately there are about 50 of you due to sign in. So unfortunately, I won't be able to interact with you. So I won't be able to respond to chat, and I won't be able to take questions and answers. With, as I'm sure most of you are now familiar with it, if you can mute your mic, that would be very useful, thank you, because often we get the background noise. So I'm now going to share my screen and start to introduce the whole day, and then really for about the next hour I'll be sharing my screen, and we'll be running through some slides and going through some examples. So let me get this up and running. So bear with it for a few seconds while it just turns into right. And hopefully, if I'm just now going to try and put it into show mode. So there we are. Everyone hopefully now can see the screen, so the welcome screen, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, and you can see my name is Ken Moore, and a little bit before we start, a little bit about the company, a little bit about Aztec, and several of you I'm sure know Aztec in any case, but we design and deliver and run seminars, consultancies worldwide, and now these days, of course, a lot more online. We also have e-portfolios as well, and I won't go through them all, but you can see in there, you can see the list of subject areas that we train in, we offer courses in. I won't read it through all of these, but this is to introduce you in our public online courses. You're on one of them now. They are a range of skills-based training for business, for professionals, and at this moment we're in one of the management development, management and leadership outlines, which is to do with emotional intelligence. If you wanted to take a snapshot of that slide with your phone, please do. This is how, if you want to follow up, you want to find out more about Aztec, or you want to contact us after the time, then please do. As far as I'm concerned, me personally, I've been involved with emotional intelligence now. It first came out, I don't know if you know the history of it, but it first was introduced into the public domain in 1995. And I can be that exact because that's when the man who put this emotional intelligence together in almost a package, which was very then accessible for those of us not in the academic realms. So a man called Daniel Goleman, and he published his first book called Emotional Intelligence in 1995. When it came out, it obviously produced quite a few ripples in the business community and gave some very good steers. I've been involved with it from the beginning, and also I was involved with it in training and development, leadership management anyway before then, before it was put into the package of emotional intelligence, because part of my academic background is psychology. So I've got a lot of experience with it. I focus on the business side of it, which is why I'm doing this webinar. I focus on the business side of it rather than the academic side of it. So as we go through it, you'll be seeing the business angle of emotional intelligence rather than the scientific and academic and psychological backup. research, which I like and I love, but it's not really, it doesn't really have a place on today. But if you wanted to check it up online, I'll give you a website where you can check it up and the names of the Daniel Goleman's 2 most popular books at the end, but you can Google it if you want yourself. So an overview of today. And you see we've really got 5 points, and we'll touch these not necessarily in this order, but an explanation of the 5 core competencies of emotional intelligence. Towards the end, a 5-step process for improving your leadership emotional intelligence, which is very important as we all need to continuously improve. How to minimize disruptive emotions. Now that's minimize disruptive emotions in yourself. Emotional intelligence isn't really concerned with managing other people's emotions. Responding to them, yes, and understanding them, yes, but not in that way. So this is about managing your own disruptive emotions, which will be threaded throughout the hour. Identify and manage people's emotions during change. Now, at the end, I'll show you a slide or two which shows you the main emotions people go through during change, and so therefore what to look for as a leader. And then throughout the hour, emotional intelligence techniques you can apply immediately. So starting off, what is an emotion? Emotion is a mind-body state triggered by goal achievement or frustration. In other words, what happens is a mind-body state means we feel an emotion everywhere. You don't get half an emotion. We feel it in our toes, in our ears, in our head, in our arms, in our brain. We feel it everywhere. The attributes of an emotion, and I'm not going to spend very long on this, but to give you an idea, there's a signal which we recognize as an emotion. That's the label we give it: anger, joy, excitement, sadness, whatever it is. Physical. With every emotion we have, we all feel it somewhere in the body. Now, many of us feel it in different places, but there is always a physical sensation in the body somewhere. So for instance, when we feel nervous or when we feel down, it's usually in the stomach region for most of us. If we feel elated and very excited and very positive, that's usually in the head and the top of the chest. It's not the same for everyone, but it's mostly where we feel it. But that's a clue as we go through. The motive in an emotion. We don't need to look at it here, but if you look at the root of the word emotion, motion means to move, and emotions motivate us to act, or hopefully they motivate us to act. There's a cognitive part to an emotion, which is a comparison from what is happening or what we think is going to happen and our goal achievement, whether that goal achievement is conscious or semi-conscious, but that's what then gives us the cognitive signal that we can compare and we can assess that emotion. So do bear with it. I will need to move through these at a pace if we're going to get through the overview and give you a good overview of this. There are the other definitions of emotional intelligence, but if we take this one, this comes from an emotional intelligence, a 3-day emotional intelligence training I went on myself some years ago. And as you can see there, emotional intelligence is the ability to realize our goals and find meaning in our lives by the skillful use of emotions as a powerful source of information, energy, and influence. And in actual fact, emotions are the most powerful source of energy in your body. It's mostly what gives us most of our energy to act and do anything. And what we're looking at with emotional intelligence, what we want to do is we want to accept that we have emotions. We don't want to deny that we're having emotions, pretend we're not having them, which doesn't mean to say you need to show them to everyone. But internally, we don't need to deny it. We need to accept that we have emotions, And the idea of emotional intelligence is to try and reduce those disruptive emotions which stop us getting towards our goal, and to enhance those positive emotions which help us reach our goal. So it's not denying we have them, it's minimizing on the one hand and accentuating on the other. And that's how we begin to look at this as we move through. Why is EI important? I'll run 3 or 4 slides here and let you see why is it important. What has the research found? And I'll read these out to you in case you can't see them. Studies show EI is the key to excellence in leadership. It shows that emotional intelligence, or EI, is twice as important for outstanding performance as IQ and technical skills. It's not more important than them because the IQ and the technical skills get us in the area to be able to perform. So as an example, I'm not in the bridge building business, but if I was put in the bridge building business and asked to build a bridge over a river, it doesn't matter how much emotional intelligence I've got, I wouldn't be able to build the bridge if I didn't have the IQ and technical skills to go with it. But what makes a bridge builder leader outstanding is the emotional intelligence which is attached to those IQ and technical skills. So emotional intelligence does not say IQ and technical skills aren't important. They are extremely important. But for outstanding performance, if we add emotional intelligence in, that's then when we get the full package. And the final point, in leadership, emotional intelligence accounts for roughly 85% of what sets star performers apart from the average. For you, we all have a work-life balance, and for all of us, at times it gets knocked out of kilter. And I'm sure at times during whatever lockdown process and period you've been through, whatever you've been through with friends, colleagues, family, and so forth, our emotional intelligence helps us rebalance when our work-life balance goes out to kilter. But what's been found is people with stronger emotional intelligence, who are more emotionally competent, are able to excel at their work and maintain the balance between their life and their work that they want, more than people who can't. It's not perfect, quite obviously, but it certainly gets us in a far better position than not having competent emotional intelligence. Emotionally intelligent managers, moving into the business realm. Emotionally intelligent managers use emotions as a source of productive energy. I was talking to one of my colleagues just at the weekend. We were putting together a tender for some work, and it was about, if you know it, it's called VUCA, which is being able to cope in volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous situations, which really is what we're in at the moment. And VUCA has practical, rational ways to deal with that uncertainty and volatility. Emotional intelligence is almost like the missing part of the VUCA to be able to lead other people through the volatility and uncertainty as well. And what we were talking about, as we were talking about that, my colleague and I, was how many people, which is completely understandable, look at the current COVID crisis in business, I'm talking about, as a complete negative situation, which I fully appreciate it is for many people, and it's difficult for all of us. But those people that are, and those companies, those organizations that are going to move through it with a minimum disruption, have to start to look at this current situation as to what opportunities does it present us. And that is how we begin, for instance, to turn emotions into a source of productive energy. So on a very easy to see scale, in training, for instance, quite obviously from the middle of March in the UK, which is where I'm based, our training, face-to-face training, was cancelled as soon as the COVID hit. And so we had to turn everything online. And as you can see, you're benefiting from that, particularly as we did with Aztec. We de-escalate conflicts and use difference as a valuable source of feedback and improvement rather than as a nuisance. We treat feelings of customers and employees as important variables in the total success formula. And one tip for emotional intelligence, which it's easy to fall into if we see it, is other people's emotions are real to them. No matter if we think they're misplaced, over the top, overreactive, or just plain irrelevant, people's emotions are real and we need to take that into account. Now, moving into emotional intelligence competencies from what Daniel Goleman put forward in his work. There are two sides to the emotional intelligence. One is the personal side and the other is the social side. The personal side, as you can see, are self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. On the social side, there is empathy and social skills. And I'm now going to take a little time, 20 minutes, 25 minutes to walk through these competencies. Self-awareness, which is the first competency of emotional intelligence. And what Daniel Goleman says is self-awareness is the most important, because if we're not aware of our emotions, we can't do anything about them. We can't use them. We can't minimize them. We probably don't even know they're happening. So self-awareness, what it is the ability to recognize and understand your moods, your emotions, and your drives, and their effect on other people, which is important for us as managers and leaders. What Goleman says are three of the key hallmarks, not the only hallmarks, but three of the key hallmarks are self-confidence, realistic self-assessment, and self-depreciating sense of humor. That doesn't mean to say we put ourselves down, but we're able to laugh at ourselves, because sometimes we do things which we think, that's a bit, I wouldn't have done that if I had have thought it, but okay, that's what we do. So self-confidence, realistic, and self-depreciating sense of humor. But I wonder, as we all sit here, I wonder how self-aware any of us are in our day-to-day life with our emotions. We don't need to be aware of them all of the time, but when we do want to be aware of them, are we able to switch in? So what I've got is a very quick exercise here to help you to tune in to your body and maybe start to tune in to those underlying emotions that are happening at the moment. So those symbols represent the five senses. And I want to take something from mindfulness, an area called mindfulness, and really just take you through it fairly quickly, and ask you to settle yourself down with whatever you're doing. If you're also on your phone or whatever, try and put that aside for the moment. Just give 20 or 30 seconds. And if you want to close your eyes to do this, please do. But the first point is, look around you and just in your head, name 5 things that you can see. In your head, just 5 things that you can see. Now, see if you can tune in to 4 sounds. What are 4 sounds around you? It could be a clock ticking, your computer making a noise, your own breathing, but 4 sounds. Next one is 3 feelings, but physical feelings. So can you feel yourself, if you're sitting down, can you feel yourself on your chair? Can you feel yourself holding a pen? Can you feel the temperature on your body? So 3 physical feelings. And then, if you can, 2 different smells. See if you can, that's often a little harder, but see if you can register 2 different smells. And then finally, 1 taste. So a small exercise which you can do at any time, either in its entirety, or you can do it just to do one or two bits of it. If you're feeling the rush of emotions and things are starting to take off and you're starting to get out of control or overtaken by emotions, try, if you can, tuning in to what's going in your body, and that way you'll be able to identify the emotions better. And we'll have a look at that more as we continue through this. You'll be able to identify your emotions better and maybe take some steps to either enhance them if they're getting you towards your goal, or minimize them if they're taking you away from your goal. Self-regulation. So having become aware of our emotions, what emotional intelligence says is we need to regulate them or manage them. And this, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, in a leadership position, this is vital. We need to manage and regulate our emotions, and it's our emotions which are the main driver of our behavior. And if we can manage our emotions, regulate our emotions, we can start to regulate our behavior. And our behavior is where we meet the world. To yourself, you are your intentions. In other words, your thoughts and your feelings in your head. So to yourself, you are your intentions, but to other people, you are your behavior. What you say, how you say it, and what you do. And if we can regulate the inner, which is what we think and say to ourselves, then we should be able to regulate or manage the outer, which is our behavior and how we say things and what we say. So self-regulation is the ability to control or redirect disruptive impulses and moods. It is also the propensity to suspend judgment, to think before acting. And that, as you well know, is not too easy to do sometimes when emotions start taking over. So what are the three key hallmarks that Goleman mentions in self-regulation? Trustworthiness and integrity, comfort with ambiguity, and ambiguity meaning contradiction, and openness to change. And I have a couple of other exercises here to be able to, when emotions start to take over, one of the key things is, if we're self-aware, what we can do is we can begin to recognize when our emotions are taking over. That's either negative emotions or positive emotions. And if they're positive emotions, that's great, but sometimes we can get overexcited and that can put other people off. And what we need to do is we need to regulate that a little bit to the company that we're in. And again, one way where we can start to get back control of ourselves rather than let our emotions run on is a small exercise here, which will only take us a few seconds. And if you do it with me, you begin to see, if we're aware, for instance, if we take the 5 senses and we become aware of what's going on, and then we can then move into this one exercise. So it's very simple to do. It's a great one. Really, really simple, very effective. Look around you and choose an object, any object, and in your mind, simply say what it is. And then when you take it, take one deep breath. So for me, we have some pumpkins on a shelf over here. So in my head, I'm saying pumpkin. And now take a deep breath. Once you've taken that deep breath, choose a different object. Name it in your mind and consciously and deliberately take another deep breath. And finally, take a third object, name it in your head, and take a third deep breath. And if you're like me, that now has focused you a lot better. I wasn't particularly nervous, but it's certainly added another layer of calmness to what I was doing. It's clarified my mind, and it's enabled me to register what's going on quicker. Now, that is an exercise you can do anywhere at any time, even in a meeting, even if you're listening to one of your colleagues. You can do that because it only takes a few seconds, and it helps you start to get control of those disruptive emotions again. It also helps you to relax, and it also helps you to de-stress. If you're in a particularly VUCA situation, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, then if you use this, you may want to do this 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Do it 9 times in total. And for instance, let's say you're going into a meeting with one of your staff, and it's one of those conversations that you'd rather somebody else did than you did. It's going to be a difficult conversation, you know it. Maybe about performance, maybe about behavior, or whatever it is. And you might want to do that 3 by 3 rather than 1. The only objects to avoid, by the way, are objects where you have an emotional attachment, because that will trigger your emotion. So for instance, if you've got drawings around, or objects from your children, as an example, or from your spouse, or from a family member or a friend, then try not to link into those, because they will trigger emotion rather than help you control it. But let's move through this. Once we've done that, once we've started to get control of ourselves, and we've calmed down and we're aware, that's not the state in itself. That's great to do, and it certainly helps us stay relaxed, and it certainly helps us de-stress. But what we want to do, if we're in a management and a leadership position, is we want to take it that step further. And if you can, once you've got into that state, there are 4 questions you can ask yourself. Once we've done the object and the deep breath, think to yourself, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? What am I doing right now? And you only need to do it at about that length, that speed. Question number 4, if you need it, is what can I do, or what can I change right now? And that could be what you're saying, what you're not saying, what you're doing, what you're not doing, or whatever. The key point though, and as a leader, try not to fall into this particular habit. Don't think, what can other people change? What can other people do? This is about you, not about them yet. So what can I do, or what can I change right now? And that could be the way you think, the way you feel, where you talk, or whatever. And I had an incident like this, that my emotions started getting out of control in a phone call about 2 months ago. Unfortunately, I clicked into this, and I thought, I went straight to the what can I do or change right now? And that was, keep my mouth shut. Stop saying what I shouldn't be saying. I wasn't giving away any secrets. I was just being somebody thought I'd done something which I hadn't done, and I was trying to explain myself, but it was actually making the situation worse. So the best thing to do was just keep quiet, approach it again the next day when everyone's a lot more rational, emotions aren't high, and it can be something as simple as that. But those 2 exercises, you'll find if you get those in a daily routine, they will help enormously when your emotions start to run away with you. So that's self-regulation. The 3rd internal one from Goleman is motivation, self-motivation. And what Goleman says there is, motivation is a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money or status, a propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. So the 3 strong hallmarks in motivation are a strong desire to achieve, optimism, even in the face of failure, which doesn't mean to say optimism and positivity when it's obviously not called for. It says we all have our downtimes, we all have our issues, we all get into situations which it's got to be difficult to extract ourselves from in business. But in a day or so's time, 2 days' time, 3 days' time, have we been able to start that trajectory upwards so that we can we can move on again. It's not saying look at everything positively. If your share prices, your stock prices have just plummeted 50%, it may take a few days to become optimistic about the challenges and the opportunities. So optimism even in the face of failure. Organizational commitment. And just for 30 seconds or so, have a think to yourself. If we talk about organizational commitment, think about what in your organization, whether it's your organization, whether you are an independent or whether you're in an organization as an employee, what is it that motivates you about working in that organization? And fundamentally, you may not know, you may know the work of a man called, I think it's Jim Collins, and it's called Good to Great was his most popular work. In that, he describes what's known as level 5 leadership. And although, level 5 leadership, do have a look at it if you need to. Two of the hallmarks of level 5 leadership, which is the most effective leadership, or that those level 5 leaders are not driven by ego or status or even money necessarily, which doesn't mean to say they aren't important for them, but they're not driven necessarily by them. And what we find is that if we take self-regulation and motivation together, they are two of the core aspects of level 5 leadership. So at some point, it's often useful to sit down and write down what motivates you. So sit down with a piece of paper at some time and write down, or on your laptop or on your phone, what motivates you. And if we're talking in a business context, obviously about the business context. Once you get those, my suggestion would be take a few minutes after that and identify your top 3 motivations, because they are the ones that are going to drive you probably the most. So motivation. So what we've done is we've just been through the 3 personal or internal emotional intelligence competencies. So I'll stay silent for 30 seconds. Have a think about self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. Which one of those would you need to concentrate on, to do a little bit of work on right at this moment in time? So I'll keep quiet for 30 seconds while you think on that. So moving on. Let's now move to the external competencies, which are empathy and social skills. So empathy is the first one. Empathy, the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people. Skill in treating people according to their emotional reaction. So understanding the emotional makeup of other people, and skill in treating people according to their emotional reaction. Over the years, many people have mentioned sympathy in relation to empathy and asked me what the difference is. The difference between empathy and sympathy is actually a thinking process. You understand and recognize other people have emotions and maybe are going through an emotion. Sympathy is when you have your own emotion, you see that and you have your own emotions with it as well. So, for instance, if you hear about, I don't know, a company in your particular industry where staff have had to be laid off, made redundant, you will probably have empathy for those staff. But if it is in your company and suddenly there's an announcement that comes through that there's a meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock because there are going to be redundancy notices given out and there will be layoffs, you will probably add emotion to it as well. And even if you don't suffer the redundancy, your colleagues may well do, and that's when sympathy will take over rather than empathy. But what we want in emotional intelligence in leadership, especially in uncertain times, is empathy. We don't want to get wrapped up in those emotions as well as the people, because it's very difficult to lead with those emotions. So empathy and sympathy. We want empathy, not sympathy. So 3 hallmarks: expertise in building and retaining talent, cross-cultural sensitivity, and service to clients and customers. So there are 6 little cartoon faces. Hopefully you can see them as they are written there. 6 little cartoon faces, because empathy is about recognizing emotion. And although they're only cartoon faces, these are 6 of the core emotions that all cultures show in the same circumstances. And even people who have been unfortunately born blind from birth show exactly the same facial expressions when they are processing those emotions. So I'll keep quiet for 30 seconds, have a look at those 6 faces, and just think to yourself, what emotions are those 6 faces showing? And then, like in every good game show you've ever seen, let's do the big reveal. It doesn't, in advance, it doesn't matter if you got all of them correct, none of them correct, or whatever, because these are only cartoon faces. They're not real faces. We're much more attuned to real faces. But happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, anger, and disgust. So they are 6 of the core emotions. And every now and again, there are resources on the net. Every now and again, have a look on the net, and maybe, sorry, I just got a message there, I was distracted. Maybe have a look on the net and see if you can see real faces and get the emotions from there. I see somebody's raised their hand, but unfortunately, as we're moving through the webinar, I can't respond to it while I've got my slides on. So I do appreciate that, and I do apologize, but in the webinar we have to move on. So they're the six of the core emotions. And if we get to recognize those, we'll be able to know how to respond better to people, because we'll be able to see what emotions are processing through them. Social skill or social skills: proficiency in managing relationships and building networks, an ability to find common ground and build rapport. And then 3 hallmarks: effectiveness in leading change, persuasiveness, and expertise in building and leading teams. Social skill is one of those areas which there are 2 sides to social skill, really. There are the skills that we can learn, and then there are the innate skills which we all have, but sometimes don't develop in ourselves. One of those can be recognizing emotions. Not everyone can recognize emotions. I'm a visiting lecturer in some universities in postgraduate courses, PhDs, MBAs, MScs, and so on. And in one PhD group I had, there was a gentleman in the group who's absolutely fantastic participant, who was autistic. And what he said to me was, I don't recognize emotions. And it was it's a very interesting participant to have in this session. It was a one-day session on emotional intelligence. And every now and again, when I'd say things like, those are the emotions that we all express and recognize, he would make sure I kept online. And he said, well, I don't recognize emotions. That, you know, most of you do, but I don't. And so do bear it in mind that some of us may have the innate abilities, but sometimes not to the same degree. And this participant was one of the best participants I've ever had on any course in the years I've been doing this. And out of that room of PhDs, I think there were about 50 or 60, he was the only one who emailed me afterwards to thank me for what we did, and to say, please keep him in touch if I was doing any more sessions on anything he wanted to be involved. And it was interesting because he didn't recognize emotions, he said, and yet he recognized and wanted to let me know that he enjoyed and got a lot out of the session. So it is interesting, this area of emotions. But to move back to social skills, effectiveness in leading change, persuasiveness, and expertise in building and leading teams. Now, whether we recognize emotions easily or not easily, one of the core factors about social skills is actually listening to people rather than thinking about your answer as you go on. And there is a listening step or listening grid here, which I've got on. I'll, in case you can't see it, I'll read it out to you. But it is a 4-stage process of listening. And what it is as I go through it, think to yourself, which of the 4 steps do I mostly listen to when I'm with my staff or with my customers or with my colleagues or in a meeting, or if for you, finance is not the area you're interested in, how do you listen when you're in a finance meeting? If, for instance, HR isn't the area you're interested in, if you're in a HR meeting, which step do you listen from? And have a listen to these. It goes from 1 to 4, 1 being the one which is least useful, to number 4 being the one which is most useful. So number 1 is downloading. It says, actually, I'm not really listening to you. I'm just listening out for confirmation of what I already believe to be true. Sometimes we can see that with people or with managers who only want to know the upside or the positive news. Or if you go and see a client, they only want to know what they want to hear, which is that it was all great. So downloading is the first one. Debating is the second. It says, actually, I'm not really listening to you. I'm more listening out for what I don't agree with, so I can try and persuade you to my point of view. And I think you probably have been in a few meetings or met a few people where that is the case. Whatever you say, it's easy for them to pick up on what you haven't done, how you didn't do it properly, how you could have done it better, how somebody else did it quicker, and so forth. And while that can be very valid, and we need that rigorous and analytical, critical thinking, this is talking about the way people listen. It's hardly, if you know somebody like this, I know someone who's like this, and you honestly can't bring up hardly any topic without them bringing the opposite case forward. So debating, that doesn't lead to rapport. The third one, which now begins to show empathy and begin to lead to rapport, it says listening to understand, which is really to do with empathy. Okay, now I'm listening. What might that be like for you, whatever the person is talking about? What would it be like to be in your shoes? Now you're starting to think about the other person and start to have empathy. It doesn't mean to say you want to feel that way, but now you're beginning to understand what they're going through. The fourth one says, create new possibilities. Now I've seen it from your point of view, I can work on solutions with you. And if I can give from experience being in management myself and working with managers for many, many years, it's easy for a manager, because we're after results, often quickly, often under pressure, often in deadlines, and often we've got pressure from above. It's very easy to slip into level number 2, which is the debating, which is just listen out for what you don't agree with, so you can argue the person around to your point of view and say, well, do this, or if you had have done that, or whatever. If targets haven't been met, if deadlines have been missed, if outcomes haven't been reached. But if we can get to level 4, that is actually the place where things are a lot more possible, and where we treat people with respect and we can have that rapport. Okay, I now understand what was going on. I now understand things from your point of view. Let's now work on it together. And the first question from that should nearly always be, what suggestions do you have? Not giving suggestions yourself. Work with the person to work it out. And so just have a think to yourself as we go through, which level there do you normally work at when you're faced with people? And then maybe after this hour, think about the different situations. In difficult situations, which one do you go to? In positive situations, which one do you go to? If you're in control of the conversation, where do you listen from? If you're not in control of the conversation, where do you listen from? And so on and so on, because we all move up and down. We all do all 4 of them, and it's no issue if we don't need to be in any one or the other. But what it is if we do need to regulate our emotions, remember this is emotional intelligence, then it's always better to aim for number 4. Right, so the 4 social skills, and that was listening. So of the two external social skills, of the 2 external emotional intelligence competencies, empathy and social skill, have a think now for 10 seconds or so of the 2, which one of the 2 would you prefer or would you need to work on right now? And so that is the overview, the introduction to the 5 competencies of emotional intelligence. And the reason that it's important in leadership is because, of course, the technical skills, your level of intelligence, your analytical thinking, your strategic views, all of those are absolutely a vital component of leadership and management. Completely necessary. What is also necessary is consideration of your own feelings and emotions and other people's feelings and emotions, because we don't work in isolation. We work with other people. We work more and more in teams, more and more in matrix organizations, more and more in networks, and people are very important. And we need to make sure that our skills in the emotional intelligence area are as good as they can be, as well as our technical and IQ skills. Don't ignore either of them. And at any one time, one of them is more important than the other. No one, including Goleman, is saying that emotional intelligence is the most important all of the time. Not at all. If we are building that famed bridge I mentioned before, if we're going to get the drawings and do the mathematics of it and do all of the tolerances that are needed, and the project management of it, emotional intelligence can really take a back seat. It's our technical skills and our intelligence in the subject which comes to the fore. But when we've got that project worked out, we've got our business case, it's been accepted by the sponsors, and we're holding our first team meeting, that's when emotional intelligence needs to kick in as part of the equation. So that's why we've been looking at, in challenging times, you're going to find people's emotions, if you haven't already, can be very volatile. And as a leader, it's not necessarily your job to tell them what to feel, but to help them regulate their emotions in the workplace can be helpful. Because if people see your emotions are regulated and you are either a level 5 leader or aiming towards it, then they will gain sustenance and support from that and will tend to react more like you do than going out of control. It's not a cure-all, of course, but it does help. So we're moving towards the end. Improving your emotional intelligence. Again, if you wanted to take a photo of this slide, please do. Improving your emotional intelligence. There are 5 steps, and I've taken this from Harvard Business Review. There are 5 steps for improving your own emotional intelligence. First one says, who do you want to be? In other words, project where you want to go, because emotional intelligence is about achieving your goals. Project where you want to go. What kind of leader do you want to be? And then start to paint a picture. Draw it out if you can. Write it out. And get it outside of yourself if you can. Point 2, where are you now? Now for that, you'll need some 360 feedback as well as your own assessment about where you are compared to where you want to go. The third one is, the third question is, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? So you need some kind of plan. Number 4 says, how do you make the change stick? Well, when you get your plan, you also need to plan in how are you going to rehearse or practice your new behaviors, physical new behaviors, what you say, what you don't say, how you act, and also what you're going to think as well. So how do you make the change stick? By practice. It's rather like if we take the world of sport, all sportsmen and all sportswomen practice. And they all practice because it helps them improve so that when they're in the game or the match or whatever it is, they don't need to think, they can react on autopilot, but they can react from their peak. They don't have to think. It's the same with us. I personally consider us to be business athletes. We don't have to be at our peak all of the time, but when we are at our peak, we need to be able to maximize that peak. So how do you make it stick? You've got to practice. Who can help you? It's difficult to improve all of your emotional intelligence alone. Usually we need a colleague or a friend or a mentor or a coach or a manager or someone. Even, and it depends on the relationship you have with your colleagues and the relationship you have with your own staff, maybe our staff and our colleagues. So what my suggestion would be, immediately after today, within the next 3 days, what's been found in learning theory is if you hear something new and you want to embed it, you want to practice it within 3 days. So today is Monday. So today, Tuesday, Wednesday. By the end of the day, Wednesday, have a go at these 5 questions and have a run through. It's not that any of us would be perfect first run through. You might need to do it 2 or 3 times. But have a think, how am I going to improve my emotional intelligence? Managing a negative state. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to run this through with you. It will only take us perhaps a minute to run through it. This is a very useful and very effective way to manage negative states in ourselves. If we were doing the full day or 2 days, we'd also add in other ways to deal with negative states, but other ways we'd add in ways to promote positive states in yourself. But many people have said to me over the years, this one is really effective. With my daughter, I gave it to her. I took her through this when she was only young, maybe 5 or 6. And you know, if you have children, often they get frightened in bed when they're on their own. And I took her through this so that she could get to sleep easy, and she wasn't plagued with the kind of imaginations that children can have, that there's something under the bed or whatever it is. And I talked to her about this just a couple of months ago, and she still does it in her life. She still does it as well. But let me take you through this can be, and if I take you through this, you may again want to close your eyes for it, but it takes us about a minute. When you do it yourself, it will take less than a minute, but as I explain it, it's how to take a negative state and how to start to manage it. So this is part of self-regulation which is competency number 2 in the internal emotional intelligences. How we can begin to reduce that negative state. So it can be a person, or it can be a situation, it can be a state. It could be someone, every time you go to talk to them, it ends up being a difficult conversation. It could be somebody who you work with and they just have a way of making you feel unconfident, way of making you feel a bit like you don't understand things or whatever. Or it could be a situation. So deadlines are approaching and you've got one day to do the deadline. And you always get a panic because you think, I can't handle a deadline. So whatever that is, so take 5 or 10 seconds and see if you can locate something in yourself, that person, that state, or that situation, something which reduces your ability to perform and produce and gives you uncomfortable emotions. I'll keep quiet for 5 or 10 seconds. Right, if you have that situation, the best way to do this is to close your eyes and then imagine it happening in your head. So you now have that picture of the person or the situation or whatever it is for you. Take all of the color out of the picture. Begin to wash the color out. So begin to wash the color out so it turns to shades of gray. And then from shades of grey into almost just one amorphous blob of grey, just but light grey. It's a fuzzy grey. So take all of the colour out. Once you've started to take the colour out, take the sharpness out of the picture that you've got in your mind. So make the edges blurred or fuzzy. So if, for instance, there are objects in the room that you're thinking of, make them blurred. Don't make the objects, don't let them be sharp. So let them blur and merge into each other, merge into the background. So you've got this grey mulch of objects or people or situations with unclear edges, fuzzy edges. Take any sounds or any words and begin to reduce the volume. Now, me personally, what I do is when I've done this and when I do it, I reach out with my hand and I turn an imaginary dial. It helps me, may help you. You don't need to do it, but take the sounds, take the words and turn the volume down so that you've got a picture which is grey, fuzzy around the edges. And now the words and the sounds, they're getting lower and lower and lower. The volume is coming all the way down to a murmur. When you've got that down to a murmur, you can't distinguish what's being said. You can't really distinguish the noise. Reduce the size of the picture or reduce the size of the person, making it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's grey, fuzzy, a little indistinct murmur, and now it's a smaller and smaller picture. And push the picture away from you. Push it out into the distance. Either push it with your hand or send it on a boat or just move it forward. So push that small, grey, murmuring, unclear picture out into the distance. And then when it's gone out into the distance, take the tip of your index finger and thumb of your left hand and just squeeze them together for the count of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that then is starting to integrate your body, your muscle memory, along with your physical, your emotional, and your mental energy as well. So a negative state, if that looks like something you could do, and it's not for everyone, but if you think that's something you can do, just practice it. After 2 or 3 times, you'll get it very, very well, and it is very effective if you do it. All right. The final area I wanted to mention was what's known as the change curve. This comes from an MD, a medical doctor. a doctor called Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a Swiss lady who dealt with terminally ill patients. And she noticed with terminally ill patients that they go through a series of emotions and then hopefully up the other side. But what's been noticed in the years since this came about is that is exactly what happens to us during change, major or minor. And it's known as the change curve now. And in these COVID times, and with, if you're the same as we are over in the UK, people working from home now, people not going into the office, people not interacting with all of the various uncertainties and some very unfortunate illnesses, maybe to family members or wherever, there is a lot of change going on. So your employees, your people you work with, are going to be going through this curve, as you are as well. So first thing is recognize it in yourself. Second thing is recognize it in other people. And what I will say is, if you can see on that change curve, there is a red line which goes from behavior to expectation. And it's very easy to expect to introduce change to somebody or see somebody going through change or a workforce and expect them to change immediately to the behavior you want. But think of it, if you are in a change management team, as an example, you've maybe taken 2 months, 3 months to work all of this through, all of the implications. If you think about it, it's highly unlikely if you have a team meeting and explain that whole 2 or 3 months reasoning and rationale in an hour to expect people to then behave how it's taken you 2 or 3 months or weeks to work out. So what on the left-hand side of the curve, you can see it's all emotion. There's shock, there's denial, there's anger, there's blame, there's self-blame. You know, the first is the shock. The second is denial, which is, this can't be true. This can't be happening. We're solid, our company. We don't need to make redundancies. There must be a mistake. Then anger. Anger at the fact it's happening. Then it's easy to blame somebody. Well, we were fine till that new departmental manager came in, and they are the ones that have made this situation worse. It's very easy to blame someone. And then self-blame. I should have seen it coming. I should have applied for that departmental manager role myself. I knew it. I knew I'd get someone who would change the whole situation. Oh, it's me. I've brought this situation on. It's very easy to go into self-blame. The end of the emotions are signaled when people go into the pit of confusion. And that's when your people will come to you and they'll say, I don't know what to do. So what do I do? We've got the new IT system running alongside the old IT system. Where do I send the invoices to the clients from? I'm not really sure. And that, although it's a confusing situation, is a beacon. You think, great, they have reached the pit of confusion, meaning they're not quite sure which one to stay in, the emotions, or now move to the thinking and the rationale, which is where we begin to accept the situation, do some action planning, and we finally get to enhance performance. So you can find this on the net with excellent explanations, but your staff will be going through emotions in this change. They may not show it. It may not affect them badly. It may not affect their performance, and many of them can handle it themselves. But be mindful of it. Look out for the denial, for the anger, for the blame, for the self-harm. If people aren't making targets because they're working from home and they blame it on working from home, maybe that's the situation they're in. So bear with them, support them, help them through the emotions, let them know it's totally normal. When they get to the pit of confusion, start to lead them out of the emotions into the enhanced performance. So accepting the situation, work with them to action plan, and after a while, it will enhance performance. There is one final area I will ask you to do, and thank you for bearing with it. I think we're 5 minutes over the hour, but I'm just right at the end. Action planning. Whatever you've heard today, whatever you've thought today from what we've said, have a think now as I'm talking about it, but within the next period of time, sit down and write down or type out, what will you, from what we've talked about with emotional intelligence and leadership, what will you stop doing? What will you continue to do? And what will you start doing? Now, if you want to do all three, that's great. If there's two, great. But my suggestion is pick one of them. Is there something you've thought of or heard from today that you want to stop doing? Is there something you've heard of or thought from today that has confirmed you and you want to continue doing? Is there something you've heard or thought of today that you want to start doing? And write out your own action plan. It is the final stage in emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is a methodology and it's a means to achieve your goals. And we need to action plan to get those goals. And the very final slide I will give you is the resources page. Those two titles next to Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence was his first book. Working with Emotional Intelligence, it was his second book. He has written several others as well, but they are key in emotional intelligence. If you're interested in going onto the net and you're interested in getting reading the latest research and getting newsletters, the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations is 3 W's eiconsortium.org. I'm now going to stop sharing, come back into full screen, and thank you all. I'm not sure what time it is, it's 10:06 on my clock. Thank you all very sincerely from both myself and from Aztec. Thank you very much for coming along to this emotional intelligence webinar. It was, as you appreciate, it was really an introduction. We were almost surfing on the waves of emotional intelligence. And some of you will be familiar with emotional intelligence. For some of you, it will have been new. Thank you very much for coming along, and hopefully see you in another webinar, or even face-to-face at some time in the future. So I'm going to be, pleasure, whoever said that, thank you. I'm now going to be closing down. Hi there, is that Jasper?
This is Jasper from Aztec. Before you end, we have one question from one of the participants. Perhaps we can just address it.
Okay.
Infon Itur Kudo asked, how can one apply emotional intelligence in handling the feelings of resentment towards people who don't seem to meet with the expectations required of them?
That one is, you have to look to the negative state that we did right at the end, where you take the picture and reduce it and so forth. You have to take that, or you don't have to, but that's one of the ways to reduce it. But again, we would explain this if it was a day. One of the points about emotion is, although it's a hard fact to accept, we are all personally responsible for our own emotions. If those emotions for us are negative and disruptive and stop us getting towards our goal, which is, for instance, working with people because we have a resentment towards them, we've got to then reduce that emotion. But, and the but is important, more importantly, to whoever it was that asked that, which is a fantastic question, to whoever wrote that, what emotion do you want in its place? That is the important question. And what you do is you begin to reduce the emotion you don't want, and you begin to practice the emotion you do want. So if I can give you an example from my own life, I used to be in a situation, I was in a sales role many years ago when I was in my early 20s, which got me very, very stressed. And I used to say to myself and to other people, I don't want to be stressed, until it was a coach of mine. A coach of mine said to me, yeah, okay, you know what you don't want, but what do you want? So if you don't want to be stressed, what do you want? Because you can only undo not stressed, which is difficult when you're stressed. But if you know what you do want, what state you do want, you can begin to build that. For me personally, the not being stressed, when I thought about it, is I wanted to be relaxed in as many situations as I could. So now I had something to build rather than something to fight against. So in a nutshell, it's use the reducing a negative state, but more importantly, work out what do you want instead of resentment and practice that. But don't be surprised, it won't work first time. It might need 5, 6, 7, 8 attempts at it. Okay, so that's what I'd say about that, Jasper.
Yes, so far that's the question written
right.
here.
Okay, doke. Then if that's all from your end, it's all from my end. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did. And you know, please do, if you haven't been on to the Aztec website, then please do have a look at other courses. There might be other courses you think are looking very useful. There are other webinars you can come into as well. Please do. We're a great company, we're a friendly company, and if you see the name Ken Moore, that's the one to click on, because that's me, and I'd love to see you again. But other than that, thank you very much for tuning in, and goodbye to everyone.